Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast. My name is Philip Eidson, a 20-year procurement practitioner, former head of procurement and advisor to procurement leaders around the world. I started Art of Procurement to help leaders and their teams access the resources they need to increase their impact through insight-driven procurement. You are listening to our flagship podcast where we pull back the curtain and shine a light on the strategies, tactics and tools that leading procurement teams are using to align their impact with the needs of their business. In September 2021, we at Art of Procurement collaborated with BT Source, the procurement services group of BT, one of the world's leading communication services companies, to produce a hybrid in-person and virtual event called Dare to Discover, Reaching New Heights for Procurement. As part of this event, I had the opportunity to facilitate 3 of the 4 keynote panel sessions, and so today I wanted to share the second of these sessions with you. I was joined by a panel of highly successful procurement technology entrepreneurs, CPOs, and investors to debate the big bets that have been made to spur procurement innovation. My panelists were Charlie Clark, who founded Rosslyn Data Technologies, and then more recently Darkbeam; Ulf Zetterberg, founder of Seal Software, and now Time is Limited; and Chirag Shah, founder of Market Maker 4, and now executive chairman at Simfoni. Now, I don't do Charlie, Ulf, or Chirag justice with highlighting just those experiences. They've founded and led many other companies in between. And towards the end of the discussion, I actually pulled in Adam Brown, head of the Procurement Digital Garage at BT Source, who was in the audience at the event's Dublin location. All right, so with all that setup being said, let's go straight into the session. Thank you very much, Adam. Thank you, everybody, for joining us again. And I will keep coming back to Amy as well. So hopefully won't be catching you out by surprise when I do that over the course of the next 50 minutes or so. So as Adam said, we have such a depth of experience on the panel in terms of technology and making bets. And so what I want to do is actually, I want to set the stage by asking each one of you, and I'm going to start with Charlie. What is your big bet for the future of innovation in the procurement space? I'd love to know a little bit about the thesis behind the bet that you essentially are making. And then I'll put Chirag and Ulf on notice that I want to go around the table and ask the same question to all of you.
Well, Phil, it's a bit like when the teacher asks you to answer a question and you've been daydreaming in the back of the class. But at the moment, I'm going to be very selfish here because the other 2 great friends of mine can talk about 3 other dimensions. But the big bet is obviously the theme that we're talking about. And even the last wonderful presentation from IDA, it's all about technology and it's all about the digitalization of procurement and the supply chain. And where I'm coming from, I spent 10 years, 15 years building up a company which was in analytics. And during that period, I saw and participated in many big digital transformation programs. And during that period, I saw an opportunity to fill a gap, which was really about the security of that digitalization process. Everybody's focused, Accenture, Deloitte, Ulf, and probably Chirag, when they were doing their digitalization, their digital transformation programs, spoke about the opportunity and the efficiencies they were delivering. I've come at it from the cyber risk element of it. So I've almost poacher turned gamekeeper. So what I see is as we digitally transform our procurements and supply chains, I think there is a very, very valuable opportunity to make them as secure digitally as we possibly can. Because as we've seen from colonial pipeline to whatever it is, when you get things wrong, they can be quite painful.
All right, we're going to come back to some of these themes that each of you are going to share as we go through the session, but I'm going to, just by nature of you being underneath me on the screen, Ulf, I'm going to come to you and ask you the same question. What's your big bet and why are you making it?
I think this it's kind of spin-off Charlie. I think the automation and digitalization has been the major theme the last 10 plus years. I think what added, there's a new dimension to this, and that's the kind of talent war. I think there's a shortage that most companies feel and industries about talent. and who's winning that talent war, losing that talent war. So I think automation is driven now not just about cost. I think initially it was like cost reduction, simplify. I think right now is that you don't have enough talents, so you need to start to look at automation and way to fully automate processes, to fully automate tasks, and you can't have them kind of half augmented by human beings anymore. So I think the combination of that, like more effective collaboration, automation into the kind of a next generation of tools that is fully automated, so you cannot. You're always going to look for cost efficiencies. I mean, that's the nature of procurement and sourcing. But I think you're now forced to drive it from a shortage of talent. You can't hire easily the same amount of people you hired before.
All right, thank you, Ulf. And that's a good topic for us to dig into later as well, because we often think about technology as taking away jobs as opposed to we need it because of shortages that then allow us to go and do other things, more impactful things. Chirag, last but by no means least, what's on top of your agenda in terms of the bets that you're looking to make or have made right now?
Well, good afternoon, everyone, as well. But at the risk of putting the audience to sleep, I want to talk about insights and innovation around insights. So in the expression insights, I think, is heavily overplayed, and everyone's like, oh, I need the insights, I need the insights. But I think what's innovative, or where there's innovation in this, obviously Simfoni as a spend analytics business, we focus a lot on visibility today. And visibility is about being able to look into your data and being able to say, oh, I didn't realize Ulf and Charlie, we use the same suppliers. Maybe we can get together and be more organized about how we do that. But that's not the innovation. The innovation for me is, where is it going next? And it's very interesting. You've got three speakers here, all of whom play a role in this innovation, which is about what I call the interpolation of content. So, if you look in the world of data, analytics, information management, you've got your own internal data, that's the visibility piece, but then you've got third-party data, you've got risk data, Charlie just mentioned about cyber, and you've got data related to market, commodity price data, and you've got data related to ESG metrics and all these other things. Mm-hmm. And the real insights, I think, in terms of innovation and next generation, are where you are able to, is where the intersection lies between those different sources of data. That's really insightful, where you say, oh, hang on a minute, I've got a vendor, and this is how much business I do with them. This is how much we spent last month, okay, internal. But then looking at, oh, there's some risk here. I'm seeing something on the cyber scale. I'm seeing something in terms of supply chain risk, environmental or geographic disruption. I'm looking at vendor metrics in terms of diversity and responsibility and so on. And it's really when you start triangulating those things that you get real nuggets of information as to, what should I expect from that vendor? What should I be concerned about? What are the opportunities? So for me, it's it's lifting up to the next level in terms of using all the information out there in a smarter way.
Now, can technology give you the answer? And when I ask that, it's, you think about getting data from all these different points. It's about decision making. You're getting data from all these disparate points and all together in one place. Are we going to get to a point where we can rely on the system, the AI, the automation to drive decision making from that data, or are we always going to be constrained by our ability to interpret the data that's in front of us? And sure, I'll ask you that question just as a kind of a follow-on from the points you were making about data, but I would love everybody else's perspective too.
Sure. So I think the true answer to that question, we need to get into the buzzword of AI, right? So AI is a number of different things, and they can play different roles. So in its simplest form, you have regression, and the ability to just look at patterns. The next level up from there is perhaps machine learning, and probably 90% of what we recognize today as AI is really machine learning, right? It falls under the umbrella. Strictly speaking, it's not AI, but that's where most of what you recognize and see today in terms of automation is pattern recognition. But where it's going is really in terms of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. This is where you will start to see the ability for computers to manage that data in a way that we can't, and to be able to interpolate masses of data and then pull out, review, scan, assess, analyze, and then piece together 4 or 5 relevant data points into an overall messaging where you're then able to say, you know what, Phil, you need to, go and close your windows because there's going to be a storm this evening, which is all you need to know. You don't need to know what the temperature is. You don't need to know, you know what I'm trying to say. So
just which actions to take.
I'm sorry?
Just which action to take is all you need to know.
Yeah, a set of options, maybe a decision tree. So look, how do you feel about this? Because if you feel good about this, I don't think we're going to be at the stage where we are perhaps quite as the AI is quite as prescriptive as I just described with the window yet. I think that's probably still another five years out. But I think what AI will do is give you a decision tree and say, hey, if you don't want to get wet, you want to close your windows because and blah 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 and more. I don't know how far I can stretch this analogy, but I think that is we're very close to that. We're very close to being able to guide. Let's call it guided procurement.
Charlie, I'm going to throw if you got any reaction to some of the things that Chirag talked about there.
Yeah, for years, Phil, as you know, I've often looked, because I was at my last company was a spend analysis company. Yeah. I've looked at spend analysis and the manner in which spend analysis is undertaken within a large enterprise where the spend is categorized into a taxonomy. That reminded me very much of managing money when I was an investment banker, where I had quite a lot of money under management, which I ran on a global basis. And each of those shares or bonds that I owned in that portfolio resemble in many ways a category. So I could own a line of Berkshire Hathaway shares, and it could be in exactly the same way. It could be a category. It could be pumps in Weir Group. And I managed that line of stock in exactly the same way, in many ways, that a category manager manages that relationship with that supplier. And therefore, so what I saw when I was managing money is I had all of this data coming in through a machine, something called Bloomberg, which is something like Simfoni does to their category managers. And when you start telling me that a machine is going to start making a decision as to whether I sell or buy that share, I do start questioning it. Because there are people that have bought and sold opportunity and risk for many, many years that I think we can learn a lot from. Now, I do believe AI, machine learning, exactly as Chirag is talking about, can accommodate a huge amount of a company's indirect spend categories, those that are, generic categories. But when you're coming into the direct categories where you've got commodity price fluctuation and volatility, you've got very complex supplier relationship managements to manage, and potentially macroeconomic and ESG things, I think the technology that we are talking about will help massively in managing that category and that relationship. I do believe for many years to come that you will need somebody to ultimately analyze, compute, and make those calls. That's my view.
Which is interesting because that's kind of a different skill set, perhaps, than what we have today. Because it's more around the decision making as opposed to going and getting farming for the insights, if you will. The technology is farming for the insights for you.
Exactly. I'm a great believer, and I have been for yonks. The big bets now are going to be all about how did I buy and sell a share 100 years ago when I was a manager. I don't know how that happened. I pressed a button 20 years ago and it just happened. And I think we were talking about this the other day. I think that's what's going to happen. The process of procurement is going to be digitalized. It's going to be friction-free. The requisition, the purchase order, the invoice will all be friction-free. It'll be done. So the sourcing manager and the procurement manager is going to be more like a manager of opportunity and risk and a relationship with that supplier.
Ulf, I want to get some of your response to what Chirag and Charlie's opinions are on this.
Well, I think we're still going to be boring, right? We talk about change management. I think there's always been about people, process, and technology. If one of the three runs ahead of the other two, it slows things down. I think looking at machine learning or AI, the first part, I've come a long way. If I compare 10 years ago, there was much more of a kind of a nervousness, scariness to trust the box to make kind of a decision for you or give you guidance. Today, technology has been easier to use. I think Charlie kind of hit something. I think there's a knowledge inside an organization. How do you capture that knowledge and make that work for you? I mean, the machine has to be trained and taught something. It's not just going to wake up and be psychic day one and know exactly I'm going to do this for this company and something else for another company. So I think kind of looking at this and approaching it like be able to capture the knowledge that exists in an organization, kind of put that in the new modern technology to use. I think that's how you're going to build a trust in the system, and more then I think you're going to rely on the machine to make decisions for you, or what Chirag said, like insights, guidance. But I think that we can never lose sight of that. This change management is the hardest for any company to do, and it's like three pieces that got to walk in the same path to be successful.
Yes, something that you said earlier was around, because when we look at technology, often there's, folks come to this from two different perspectives. One is, this is a wonderful opportunity for me to be able to make more impact in my work, or for my organization to make more impact in my business, because we're going to invest in doing something different. Or on the other hand, it's, okay, I'm going to fear this because it's a little bit of the unknown. It's going to take away what I do on a day-to-day basis. What's left for me? Is it taking my job? You talked a little bit about talent shortage as actually being a driver of the use of technology, and I think specifically automation technology. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about what you're seeing from that perspective and how that isn't necessarily something to fear, but it's something to embrace.
Well, I think it's when companies start a very ambitious agenda goals about automation, then you need to have certain training, a certain kind of background to be able to kind of work in those environments. So I think if you move, going back to what I said before, if you move too fast and you want to be kind of racing to the finish line, you need then the best and the brightest, and there's a shortage of the best and brightest, and that's not just around technology. Process, understanding industry, etc., the whole thing. I think what been interesting is that I think that the value of talent is and we're going back to okay. So before, automation has been a way to cost reductions. You want to automate something, take the labor out of it, right? I think now you're going to start to see it actually gives you an upside. It's not necessarily cost, right? But can I do something faster? Can I get to a decision quicker than my competitors? Can I simplify some things internally in a smarter way? And as I said before, I think the trick with the talent war is like twofold. So like, how do you attract the best? So now you got to start to think like it's like, how do you engage someone? How do you make it like really kind of fun to work there, so you get the full value out of them? But more importantly, like that's like the rest of the organization needs to kind of keep up pace. You can't just go and hire 10 super smart data scientists out of uni and think they're going to change everything, because you can still rely a lot on the people that have been doing this for a long, long time. Go back to Charlie's, right? I mean, there's so much knowledge. And I think the trick will be, how can you bridge that gap, and how can you create a culture that both these two groups in a simple way kind of feels at home. So you value that kind of a knowledge and experience that is absolutely a must to have, but at the same time you embrace the new. So it's tricky to be able to kind of find the right team structure, team building. I think it comes down to the best leaders is going to be figure this out, and they're going to be able to kind of marry these two kind of skill sets and kind of get super performance team. And I think they're going to be the winner in each, whatever industry and sector they're participating in.
Chirag, I think you were wanting to jump in there for a moment.
Yeah, I just thought I'd make a comment about. I love this idea of that Ulf mentioned about the people, process, and technology have to move in sync. I think it's a really insightful comment. But I want to remind everyone, because we're in a world today where everyone talks about AI and automation and in this sort of new era, new concept, or we've got to get our heads around it. Automation has been happening our entire life, right? And probably the best example of automation is the automobile, cars, right? So, in order to drive a car 30 years ago, I'm giving my age away here now, or even 40 years ago, you needed to know how to change gears. You needed to know how to brake differently in the rain than in the dry. You even needed to know how to change the oil potentially, or even change tires, change a wheel, all this kind of stuff. And over the years, cars got more reliable, which is just another word for automation. Oil didn't need changing anymore, or at least not that regularly that you needed to do it on the fly. Or same with cars, punctures just don't happen that often, and so on. So at any point in time, we've never been afraid of this, right? As drivers of vehicles. We've just been the beneficiaries of it and said, oh, great, I don't need to know how a gearbox works in an automatic car. I don't need to know that. I'm just the beneficiary. I just need to know that I can now focus on doing the bit that I enjoy the most, which is the driving, and getting from A to B in the most efficient way, and so on. So I think that it's helpful for us to consider this journey as just another extension. It's exciting now because we're at the threshold where we're starting to automate things that perhaps as human beings 20, 30 years ago, we didn't think were even automatable, right? Mm-hmm. We're getting to the limits of our boundaries of imagination. And so that way it's creating all this, discussion and so on. But ultimately, if it's designed in the right way and implemented correctly, the end users, it's nothing for anyone to be fearful of. It's going to be there to benefit them. They don't have to understand it. I mean, yes, of course, a handful of engineers and data scientists somewhere in the world do need to. But for most of us, we're just going to be the beneficiaries of just easier procurement processes. We call it the democratization of procurement, right? So in a way, more and more of procurement will be handed back. Why does procurement exist? Because we needed to put controls in place to make sure that end users aren't buying stuff in inappropriate ways, right? As you automate, what you're going to be able to do is give more and more of that procurement responsibility back to the end user to say, hey, you can do your own procurement, but here are some guide rails or some training wheels or whatever you want to call it, which we're going to put in place to allow you to do that in the right way, using smart intelligence to protect you from doing, making mistakes.
I think it's a great comment. I think that it's also, that's when things are really matured, right? So like the ABS brakes, nobody doubt they're working because there's a governance, there's testing. I think what we're struggling with when we're working with technology inside one single company is to get them to feel the trust. How has this been tested and validated? Am I betting my business on this? If I put something on this end, what comes out on the end? So I absolutely 100% buy that. I think we're 10, 15 years and we're going to have a completely different level of automation in procurement and sourcing. But right now, it's that thing like what is really tested and validated? Can I trust this black box? Because we don't have the same kind of we're 10 vendors that claim the same thing. And when you come to the car thing, after a while, everybody has an ABS brakes. It's a good example, right? And that's like it's standard, done. So I think eventually you get to that kind of like it's done, and we all trust it and we move on.
I think that's a great point because, even right now, a lot of us will struggle when we put spend analytics systems in tools with the data that comes out of that because it's only as good as the data, obviously, that goes in. And the technology, can obviously help in normalizing and making that data more intelligent. But trust is so important. I'm going to come over to the studio. I see Amy. I think you're ready with a question or two. So I'll hand over to you.
It's just one question, really. We've mentioned a lot of the buzzwords: innovation, AI, innovation, disruption. But the one that we haven't mentioned is blockchain. So do you just see this as another engine for change, or is this actually something else that we really need to think about and consider?
Great question, Amy. I'll hand that over to Charlie, first of all. Blockchain, is that something we should be keeping our eyes on, or is it overhyped?
Like a lot of great technologies, it is overhyped. However, I think it's the Forrester wave. You've got the sort of the trough of disillusionment, and then it goes mainstream. I think we're in almost the trough of disillusionment. I think we do have to keep an eye on it because there are so many fabulous characteristics about it that enable procurement folks to potentially change some of the more archaic and difficult things like contract management and all of that, and proof of purchase and some of the more gnarly things like what we buy can be more secure if we use the blockchain. There is a project at the moment, and I think it's going to be in the next month or two, where the London Stock Exchange is going to start experimenting real-time trading and settlement using blockchain. I think we do need to see something like that happen before a company will bet the bank, as Ulf was saying, on a decision. We do need to see, how this is going to work, but blockchain is not going to go away. It's got its talons in our business. We just need to have some really, really good use cases at scale for us to see all the benefits.
Mm-hmm. Ulf, what's your perspective on blockchain?
I agree. I think it's a powerful piece of technology. It's all about application and use case. I put it in the same category as machine learning and AI. And there are some really, really good use cases for it. It makes sense, but on its own, it's not going to change the world. It's how you apply it. I think there's a safe way for multiple people to participate in the workflow with much more of a trust. So I think there's a role for blockchain, and I think we're going to see more and more of that as an enabler for use cases applications.
Thanks. And Chirag?
So I've got quite a different view on this. I think we need to think about technology. I think about technology in two different ways. I think what you've got is enabling technology and infrastructure technology. Enabling technology is something that you do, right? So, for example, you choose to have a P2P system. You choose to have a CRM system. You choose to have a website, right? These are optional things that you can tap into to make your business, organization, operation more efficient if you feel it's going to help you. Infrastructure technology happens to you. You have no choice in it. So email, no one chooses to have it or not have it. It's happened, right? And you just get on the train, and that's now how you're going to communicate. Bluetooth is another example. If you remember when Bluetooth, came out, everyone was like, "Oh, Bluetooth is going to change the world." It's going to do certain things in a very useful way, but no one had to make a choice. Do I go and buy Bluetooth or don't buy Bluetooth? It just happened. It's there. It's an option that is available to you if it helps you in a certain circumstance. Wi-Fi is similar. For me, blockchain is in that latter category. It's going to happen. It's not going to affect any of you. It'll just happen in the background, just like you use a credit card. Do you know what happens when you swipe your piece of plastic? No clue, right? I don't anyway. But it does the job. Money comes out of my account and I get stuff, right? And I'm happy. So I think blockchain is just going to be, this kind of infrastructure technologies that come in. A few very, very, very clever people on the planet are going to know how it actually works and so on. All we're going to do is see things happen, faster, more visibly, with a greater degree of trust, greater oversight, and we'll think this is a good thing. That's it.
So that being said, should we as procurement supply chain leaders be keeping a watch on the applications of blockchain, or is that too far ahead of things right now?
That's my point. I don't think you need to worry about it. It'll happen to you. One day, you'll be doing your transactions, through your bank or through your payments provider, and they'll just tell you, oh, by the way, here's the blockchain report. That transaction is sitting here, and your goods are over there, and and if you need it, and you're like, wow, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm. Adam, I'm going to put you on the spot. seeing as though you're now sat on stage and you're mic'd up. There's no hiding place for you now. Blockchain is one of those things where we hear so much about it and you're questioning, like, okay, what does that really mean for me? Where do you sit?
I was actually quite relieved to hear what Chirag was saying there, because for me, all of these technologies, the underlying technology in the infrastructure, I don't actually care about. I'm interested in what problem is being solved. And so the great example of that is, you have contracts. You can use blockchain in contracts to add that degree of trust, or even with the suppliers. So, with our supply base, there's Trust Your Supplier is the initiative. Yeah, we're using that. We've deployed that. Behind the scenes, it's blockchain doing it. But does the fact that it's blockchain change my decision to go ahead and implement it in any way? Well, no. It's the checklist of the things that it can do for me. And one of those things on my checklist is it secure? Is it provable? Is that transparent? Which just lends itself to being solved by blockchain as a technology. And so it goes, and so it goes on. And that's what holds true for me for all technologies. It's what is it doing? What problem is it solving? And it's been really interesting. I wasn't actually going to kind of be part of this panel. I sat here and just kind of sat here and stayed here listening because I find it fascinating. And one thing that you guys have been touching on with the future and these big bets for innovation that's ringing true, and there's Chirag's example about the cars as well, is we're augmenting people. Yeah. There's a certain amount of that human element that you can absolutely replace with technology. We replaced having to walk 100 miles with a car taking us 100 miles. It's a lot more pleasant, but still had to drive the car. We augmented that experience. And now with the likes of Tesla and autopilot, we're augmenting further. So we no longer have to sit there and drive. We've got the car doing that for us and augmenting that experience. But fundamentally, we're still shipping ourselves from point A to point B. And the same, in my mind, is going to hold true for the time being, at least with procurement. There's stuff which we can fully automate. The frictionless example, that complete frictionless bit, absolutely we can do that. For the simple, repetitive stuff, we're augmenting the people. And a point which I've made before is people are there for their brains, for their brain power, for the intuition, that element that can't be automated. So really, it's all about how can we augment people to free up all of their time from doing stuff that they don't need to be doing, so they can concentrate on the bit that really requires the human interaction, that human bit. So that's the where it's all going for me, at least in the short term. And as we find things become more productized, more simple, more commoditized. So what we see today is requiring a human interaction to do a negotiation or a contract or a buying. In 10 years' time, that same stuff will have been simplified, it will be productized, and then that'll be done by systems, and we'll be off doing something else that we can't even particularly foresee right now. So that's kind of where my mind is going. But there was something, we had a prep call which I listened into as well, and I know you have this in your notes as well, Phil. So there was something in there, it may be lower down, that I'm really keen to get into and listen to what the guys have to say about this. And that's that, what was the phrase that was used? The modularization, the componentization of the technology. So yeah, if that's the bit that, sorry to kind of hijack things and kind of push you in a don't forget to talk about that, because I'm interested in hearing about that piece as well.
All right, so if we don't talk about that, then I know that I'm fired from any future panels.
No, I just won't let you hang up. I'm going to keep this session going into the break, and you won't get a cup of coffee.
So actually, before I go there, I want to come back to Charlie, because we were talking about big bets. And Charlie, you talked about cybersecurity risk. And I feel like that's one of those areas that we know in concept, we know because we see the news, what the downstream impact of it, but we as procurement folks don't necessarily know what to do about it or what to do with it. Obviously it's a space where you're putting, you're making your bet. And I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about how, as procurement leaders, we should be thinking about protecting not only our procurement systems, but our enterprise from cybersecurity risk.
Well, it's very interesting. I think one of those things that Chirag was talking about is that infrastructure of the blockchain. I mean, blockchain is phenomenally secure. So, I mean, it's the benefits from a security perspective if you're using blockchain are fabulous. But let's just go back to that question. I think it has now become, everything that we're talking about is about digitalization. Forget all the buzzwords. It's about a technology. And what we are doing is we're codifying a lot of the manual processes that we're so used to it, and we're creating these wonderful applications and digital processes that replicate inefficiencies, or what we're now calling inefficiencies. And in many ways, we look at what we've been speaking about. We're actually empowering the employee, the worker, to do so much more valuable things. And I think that's, in many ways, is creating the job equilibrium. But one of those things is working in the digital economy, what I call the connected economy. Mm-hmm. And if you look at what you're doing at home or what you're doing at work, is that we now, I think, have a duty as part of an employer or an employee to protect and look after the digital assets that we are creating every second of every day. What can we do very simply is to become extremely more aware that when we buy Ulf's solution or we buy Chirag's solution, that we are buying a huge amount of opportunity to do something better, but there is also the responsibility of using those digital assets that are going to be connected with other third parties and all the rest of it responsibly. And because we are now all connected, to think that you're by yourself in the world and you're not, and when something happens somewhere else doesn't affect you, I think we need to purge ourselves from that. So BT, for instance, will probably have 30 to 40,000 suppliers connected to them in some shape, way or form, whether it be through the spend analysis solution, through the invoice solution, whatever it may be. There is, and this has happened in the last 5 years. We still, as non-digital and techie people, do not really know the implications of that, and that really resides within IT and security. I think the responsibility of being digitally secure and aware of how we interact with our suppliers should start to leave IT and security and be put on the shoulders of all of us. Mm-hmm. So just as Chirag jumps in his smart car and flies down the road at 300 miles an hour, he's had a driving license, he's had a driving test, there are speed cameras, there are this and there are that. We do exactly the same when we enter a relationship with a supplier. We go through that sensible process. So that's how I see security developing. We don't need to know about cybersecurity. That's for the experts, like Chirag and Ulf were saying. There are a few people in the world that would be brilliant at that, but we can help them secure our supply chains and our companies by being responsible ourselves and becoming aware of it.
Mm-hmm. Now I want to, and that makes sense, because sometimes you just, use this technology and you don't even think about it. So it's like the awareness is the first step in recognizing that you have a role to play in protecting the assets of your business as everything becomes more connected. I want to transition a little bit into kind of with the investor hats on a little bit. And this is actually something that Adam was alluding to, which was fascinating when we all talked in advance of this session. It was a topic that Chirag, that you brought up, and it was, we were thinking about, traditionally when you're looking at making when you're looking at making technology investments, you'll perhaps be looking at an investment that's going to take you, that you're going to sign up for 3 or 5 or 7 years or whatever, and it might take you 3 months or 6 months or 12 months or even longer to implement. And so you're kind of making a bet, and it's a big bet because there's a lot vested in the success of that technology, as opposed to right now going towards this more disposable technology, if you will, where it's not quite so, the decision making isn't quite so long term, if you or impactful. You can kind of get away from it. You can change course. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that concept and why it's something that we should all be thinking about when we look at our technology roadmaps. Chirag.
Is it me? No.
Yeah.
Yes, when we just went through a rebrand of Simfoni earlier this year, and we actually thought about putting this as our strapline. We called it Composable Procurement because it kind of goes with the symphony, musical sort of theme. But we didn't in the end because we thought everyone's going to say, "What the bloody hell is Composable Procurement?" It just sounds like word, whatever it's called. But the principal logic behind it is think about a business or an organization like a human being. I mean, it's born and then it grows and it goes through childhood and adolescence and then adulthood and then maturity and old age and all these other things. Is it necessarily the case that every time you accumulate something, it's, at the point of accumulation, you then have it forever? No, you have certain things that suit you for a certain period of time, and then you outgrow them, or and your circumstances change, and then you need something else. And so, we find in procurement, people say, "Oh, I got an ERP system," and "Oh, now we're going to get a P2P system," and then and they're making a decision as if, "Oh my God, for the rest of the history of that company, that will be." And I think technology has now become so flexible and actually cheap as well, which means that you can think about it more in that disposable way and say, "Well, look. This is what we need right now. It's plug and play. It's easy to use. It suits our need for the size of business we are, or for the challenges or the priorities that we have, our current challenges, and we'll use it for a period of time." And that's a perfectly legitimate decision to make. So maybe in 3 years' time we'll scrap this and we'll upgrade to something else, or we'll migrate to something else. So that's the first principle behind this sort of composable concept. And then the second side of it is the modularity of it, right? So it's like Lego bricks. And so you can say, well, the solution, we talk a lot about best of breed, and it's about saying, well, nowadays with APIs, I should have a best of breed philosophy. I should just take the best Lego bricks that I need to create my composable solution and recognize that is what I have. That's the best way to use the bricks to deliver the solution that I need for today. And then at some point in the future, I'll be swapping out that brick and putting in another brick, or taking out those three and replacing it with this. And that is just the future of how we should think about procurement and technology's role within that, which is why we have this composable procurement concept.
I love the idea. I'm going to pop it over to Ulf and then Charlie, because I'd like to get your perspectives on this. Ulf, do you see this? Is this an opportunity, or is it a risk for a provider? If folks go to this mindset of, I'm going to buy for the moment, but I'm always going to be looking at not necessarily looking at the next thing, but you're always looking to improve, whether that's with your incumbent or whether that's elsewhere.
I think it's both. I mean, I really think you don't buy technology. I think what we do for customers is like we let them enhance their data. If we use a piece of technology, right, am I in a better place after I use that, even if I use it for 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, right? Then the thing that you need to carefully think about, is why are you using the technology? Are we in a better place because of it? So if I want to change technology, can I have that flexibility? So we all talk about best of breed, we all talk about API, and I think that's a good kind of where you take the high road in the technology, right? But then at the same time, we want to control because we don't want to be replaced. So it's a constant. Let's be honest, it's a constant kind of fight. But I think from a customer perspective, what they need to think about the opportunity, I very much agree with Chirag, it should be something that technology comes and goes, but you always would like to maintain your number one asset is the data. Right? Take a good example, the pandemic. Everybody guessing right now what the new work model should be in the new office. Why do we guessing? Because we don't have any benchmark data, because none of us have been through a pandemic. So we don't know how it affected our collaboration patterns, our health, our well-being, etc. So this is a good example right now that companies should use technology to kind of take a moment of truth, right? Let me show how were things before and during the pandemic we're coming out. If something like this happens again, we can at least have one data set that is useful in our context. Not like a Deloitte or a PwC, somebody tells me what best is and they have 500 companies, right? but it's not related. So how does it relate to me? I think the same thing with data, right? Maintain the control of your data. Whatever technology you use is going to have to come back to you, augmented but enhanced value. And I think that what we went through in the pandemic is a good example for that. Like, I think lots of companies would love to understand how did we work before the pandemic? What are meeting culture? What are remote work? How did it impact us? Because right now we're all in a guessing game. Let's face it, right? But I agree. Technology should be this, but it comes and goes. We talk about blockchain, yep, soon it's standard. Now it's hype. AI, now it's hype. Soon it's standard. Then the next one. So it's technology comes and goes.
So own your data, make sure that the data is put a lot of focus on accurate data, importantly, and then the technology around it can supplement it based on where you are in your maturity journey and what the outcomes you're actually trying to drive are.
Yeah, and the value of data change we talked about because the context change, right? What we thought was good 2 years ago is maybe not good today, right? So how do you kind of augmentate that piece of data to give it a new context, maybe even a new attribute? So I think data is a living thing because the world is moving, rechanging. So you got to look at it. I think that's the key thing. Like, never lose control of your data and make sure that it is always yours and you can kind of bring it back from whoever the vendor is whenever you need it.
Adam, if you're still mic'd up, I'm going to put you on notice. I'm going to come back to you in a second. First, I want to ask Charlie as well, any thoughts on what you've heard here from Chirag and Ulf on this idea of composable technology?
Yeah, I totally agree with them, as you know. I'm just going to, I think taking Ulf's great analogy that every company is a data company now is very, very important. And a company actually is a data aggregator. I mean, if you think about it, I know one company in particular that in their supply chain and their procurement team, they are actually creating their own data warehouse specifically for procurement and sourcing that is not going to be run by IT, but by the supply chain and procurement team. And it's actually quite exciting what they're doing. And I'll go one stage further, slightly higher up and more strategically. I think what Ulf and Chirag are saying is absolutely critical and is actually going to happen, and that's how you should treat it. But the benefits to the company like BT, for instance, is it develops even more business resilience if they are able to plug and play like Lego bricks this technology, because these big bets for us, the three of us here, because we're, that's what we do. We bet our own checkbooks on the odd occasion. We take big bets, but BT doesn't have to take big bets. And that develops really deep, sustainable business resilience through multiple cycles of the economy and the next phase of BT's development, and can almost accelerate their development if they take that approach. That's the end of my sermon.
Now, it's an interesting, perhaps, I guess if I give my perspective, and kind of interwoven into this is also a bit of a question back to you guys as well, because you have three very different companies doing different things, innovating completely, which is fantastic. And we're talking about this composable modularity of these tools and systems. So that's your end. But then on my end, on BT Source, the digital garage that we run, buying and implementing this stuff, I absolutely love the idea of this. This is exactly what I'm doing and creating here. BT Source, with our ecosystem of technologies, is taking this best of breed, this innovative stuff, and plugging it in and weaving it together. But what I find and what I see is that I might want to implement a best of breed spend analytics platform. Okay, I go ahead and do that. And then the same again with the contracts platform, and the same again with a cybersecurity analysis awareness platform. I do these things. But what I see then from some of the suppliers is, as time progresses, is then the diversification in your own product. Say, okay, I started off with spend, or I started off with contracts, or I started off with cybersecurity, and now I'm going to start branching a little bit sideways. So for you guys, at what point do you consciously think, well, I'm going to stick to my roots, or I'm going to consciously spread out? Where do you guys kind of draw the line? Or do you even go, we're innovators, we're entrepreneurs. Well, I have this company which does this one thing. Now I'm going to start another company which does another thing, but have the two be able to plug and play. And so you can do this composable thing. What are your thoughts on how you guys, as the innovators in this, are going to do? So I'll just play that white. Ulf's in the middle. I'm going to go to Ulf straight away.
It's a great question, comment, Adam. I think that the reality for me personally is like that the engagement with organizations like BT, you learn new things. In the early days, you have a thesis, you have an idea, and until you become mature, and we're talking about 4, 5, 6 years journey, you are pivoting slightly because you learn more by we're dealing with the real world, and the real world is the customers, right? You're sitting in a lab and you're testing something. Then, of course, that's kind of phase one. Then phase two is like when you also learn from the customer, you also start to see potential opportunities, right, to kind of add things to your solution, because there are gaps, right? And that should come from a kind of a natural conversation with the clients, right? That is, as much as we trying to push something, is also an ask that we have kind of earned the trust from the customer, that they kind of open up and say, listen, we have other areas we need to think about, and do you have any ideas? Can we help, etc. So I think initially you learn a lot to kind of harden your core solution. Once you deliver that, and you have a happy customer, like, then I think it's a natural progression that you start to see, like, can we add something on the side? But for me, it's always been a part of collaboration with your customers, right? You don't kind of sit and come up with this at home. It shouldn't be a surprise for a customer like BT if you're using a solution, then a vendor suddenly launch something completely strange, right? In that case, we don't have a good kind of relationship. So I think this kind of enhancements is something that's kind of is a part of learning more from the customers, and then of course testing the idea before you decided we're going to go and make more investments to build something that it makes sense.
Charlie and Chirag, well, what about you guys? Do you, with that kind of question from mine about, do you stay super focused, or do you diversify more? Do you enhance what you have? Do you branch out sideways and move from, I don't know, do you move from spend analytics into then thinking, okay, well, the next thing we could kind of go a little bit sideways into contracts? Or, it's, what do you think, Chirag?
I'm staying quiet because my answer comes with a health warning, because I am not good at this. Okay, so as a typically natural entrepreneur, so what you're describing is this challenge between let's call it the horizontal versus the vertical, right? So you mentioned spend analytics. Do we focus deeper and deeper into classification and rules engines and algorithms that we can automate and classify, and parent-child and normalization and data cleansing, and go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into how we can make the spend analytics tool even more Carlos Fandango than yesterday? Or do we recognize this opportunity we talked about earlier about the intersection of data, and say, we should get into should cost modeling, and we should go to impact assessment, sustainability analytics, and risk metrics, and spread ourselves this way. So I understand the question very well. I think if probably the best way for me to sort of respond to that in terms of my experience is about partnerships. So it is with the use of APIs, it is, I won't say easier and easier, I would say it's child's play to create seamless interactions between adjacent technologies. So Charlie's business, Darkbeam and Simfoni, we already have an alliance, been going for more than a year now, and you can tap into if you can tap into that functionality straight through from the analytics, and vice versa through a connection of 2 or 3 APIs. That's all it is, and it's very simple. And I think, from a BT source perspective, I'd be thinking that way about saying, how do I create an ecosystem of partners, more than anything, where the culture and the chemistry is the right fit, right? The target market, we're after the same target market. Is it mid-market? Is it enterprise? Is it SME? And where the chemistry is good. I'm lucky to have known Ulf and Charlie for regrettably more than 20 years. Regrettably because I'm that old and, and so are they. but that's important. And, the ability to be able to connect and have the trust and have those sort of relationships is as important, if not more so, than the technology itself. I can find plenty of other vendors potentially that do similar things, but what matters is we can, trust and work together and pursue business development and client partnership opportunities in a collaborative manner. So I'd focus there. I'd focus on that side of it.
That's great. So, now, whilst you've been talking, because Amy's next to me, and I can kind of looking over here at the iPad with a question as an ideal one, which is coming in, I think, probably for all of you, but mostly Charlie, you're kind of springing to mind with this, and it's about innovation and small companies, and where does innovation come from? And yeah, in your mind, you guys are innovating. Is that grassroots of innovation? Is it coming from the small companies like yourselves? And what about then how do we balance off the risk of acquisition stifling the innovation? How do you see that, Charlie?
What, me going and acquiring something?
Well, the other way around, to be honest. So if you guys are very innovative, small companies are coming out with this great new stuff. You have an ambition at some point. Your company's going to grow, get more, get bigger, perhaps get acquired. But then, does that, in your view, will that then stop the innovation? And
well, it's a very good point, because I think it follows directly on from what you've just said. I'm quite narrow and go quite deep, and I've always been a bit like that specialist. And when the three of us started off on our entrepreneurial careers, big companies like BT or General Electric, whatever, wanted to buy solutions. And we always start as an entrepreneur is fixing a small problem and then going deep. So actually 20 years ago, it was bloody difficult to go into the procurement supply chain world, because we had a point solution, and yet the buyers wanted the 9 yards. Today, it's an entrepreneurial sort of dream. You look at how much money is now going into our space. It is so exciting. Archlet this morning, 10 million Series A. Chirag 2 or 3 weeks ago, a similar amount. It's really, really exciting, where you can get great point solutions, bring them together through APIs to create that one solution and then modularize it. So what happens there? Actually, I do think that in the previous days, large companies like Ariba or SAP, same company now, but Oracle, and to a certain degree Cooper, would fill gaps by buying, one of us. And they would have a gap because they want to sell you a total solution. Now, I think there's a division in the road that's going to come down, we're going to get close to, where those acquisitions where we found good exits previously won't dry up, but these guys are going to get lots and lots of competition from the way that we now are able to modularize and bring together technologies. So, I think that going forward, we might find that smaller companies actually merge to create bigger companies, as opposed to larger companies buying smaller companies. But that's just we're just daydreaming now.
Fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go for it, Chirag.
I got an interesting story. I think it doesn't have to be the way that you've described, or that one might imagine that the large companies that squash or innovation. In my last business, it was a sourcing company. I sold to exchanging. When I arrived there, I saw this product called tail spend management, and it's the first time I'd ever heard about it. This is going back 2013, And I'd never heard of Tailspin before. And I was completely blown away by it. And in fact, I said, you know what? And it wasn't the rationale for acquiring my business, by the way. The rationale for acquiring the business was a bunch of other things. But I said, we could take this sourcing platform, and if we'd made a few tweaks and changes and, a couple of APIs with some other bits and bobs, we could create this amazing Tailspin solution and automate all the stuff that you guys are doing in the traditional BPO kind of way. And that translated into an amazing growth story for the business at the time in terms of the technology enablement of the Tailspin solution, which, cut long story short, sort of has migrated across, and that's one of the other things that we do at Simfoni now. But that has been spurred on by, if you like, the process of two organizations, one very big and one very small, but sparking off an innovation appetite to then come up with something else that meets a new market need for a future generation.
That's absolutely fascinating. I'm kind of conscious we've run out of time, which is exceptionally unfortunate because this is an incredibly interesting discussion. I'm just going to fire out with one quick last question. All of this, we're talking about innovation. In one word, what would you say is the big one thing for procurement people to watch out for technology-wise? The next big change? I'm going to start with you, Phil, just to be cheeky.
What I think of is, and we've kind of alluded to it a little bit today, is the idea of ecosystem. And that's where the best of breed comes in. It's all about leveraging the entirety of this ecosystem in kind of an open source way, rather than thinking of it as closed source platforms, which we may have done in the past. So I'll go with ecosystem.
Who wants to go next? Adam?
Well, I was going to say Chirag's next on my view of screens here. So go on, Chirag. We'll run through.
I think it's going to be chatbots. I think that's going to be for the most of procurement users. It's going to be interactive chat, chatbots that are guiding you through processes and making your life easier.
Oh, great. And Ulf?
100% agree. I think intelligent chatbots that is tied to that ecosystem, that's the next big paradigm.
Cool. Charlie?
Well, I'm not going to talk about technology. I'm going to say leadership. We need to think differently.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's been absolutely wonderful to have all of you guys here. Phil, Chirag, Ulf, Charlie. Hugely appreciate you guys taking the time. You're all incredibly successful entrepreneurs, investors. You have this fantastic view of the future. So thank you hugely for doing this. It's been a great session. I'm going to stop there. We have, I
want to thank you for listening into today's episode of The Art of Procurement. To go deeper, including access to transcripts and actionable outtakes from the podcast, join the free level of our AOP Mastermind community. To learn more, go to artofprocurement.com/mastermind. And to find our entire back catalogue of almost 400 episodes, go to artofprocurement.com/podcast.